This is the Art of Network Engineering podcast. In this podcast, we'll explore tools, technologies, and talented people. We aim to bring you information that will expand your skill sets and toolbox and share the stories of fellow network engineers.
All right, since you're new to the team, to get you acquainted with our practices, I'd like you to implement this change on 10 switches. Well, that doesn't sound so bad. Seems pretty quick and easy. Sure, I can handle that. Excellent. That's just the can-do attitude I was hoping to hear. You're right. It'll be really simple. I just need you to write up your change script, schedule it with the affected areas, submit a change request, present your change to the approval board. I'll get you the lucky rabbit's foot to have for the meeting. It seems to help. Check the vendor website for any bugs, temporarily disable monitoring during the change, take pre-change backups, re-up your car's extended warranty, let the NOC know what you're doing and when, right before the change, spin around twice, hop on 1 foot 3 times, and say the alphabet backwards. Make your change on all the switches, validate your change, re-enable monitoring, take post-change backups, update documentation, close your change request, and let the NOC know when you're done. Whoa, that's a bit more complicated than I thought. The actual change is such a small piece. How am I supposed to manage all that? Find out the answer to that question and more on this episode of The Art of Network Engineering.
Very nicely done. I couldn't tell if you were doing an intro or like a DUI check. I'm not quite sure. Tim, how you doing?
I'm doing well, AJ. Things are going good. How are you?
Oh, not too bad. Doing pretty good. Andy, thanks for joining us tonight. How are you?
Hey, Tim, how did you get through that? That was a lot of words and you didn't stumble once. Did you practice all day?
No, I stumbled. I stumbled. I'm upset about it.
It was really good. Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
No, I appreciate that.
This is good stuff. Good.
It was it's one of those things where it was kind of over the top, but not really. For anybody who's been through that process hundreds and hundreds of times.
You were like giving me some PTSD. I started my vision started to go narrow. My fingers are tingling. Like, oh God, change management. Oh,
that was quite a flashback. That was good.
And now it's time for the wins. Winning in our It's All About the Journey Discord server, Bob Steele 412 signed an offer to be a network security analyst at AT&T starting next month. Great job, Bob. Tyler 8 got his first job in IT as an information technology logistics technician. Tyler's a friend of the family and recently expressed an interest in getting into tech. He started studying for the A+, updated his resume, and landed that first gig in IT. Great job, Tyler. Tim McConaughey started his new job at Aviatrix, where he is a customer solutions architect. Congrats, Tim. Andre passed his CompTIA Cybersecurity Analyst Plus. Awesome job, Andre. J Fund FTD7 says he's studying for CCNA and solved his first subnetting problem on his own. Great job. That's no joke. Joe Scott passed the Cisco SISE, which is the Implementing and Configuring Cisco ICE exam. Great job, Joe. Jamie passed the CCNA and got a job as a junior network engineer coming over from web dev in the UK. Awesome job, Jamie. SSJ Raptor passed the CCNA. Woo! That's no joke. Lil Shep 9999 got offered a help desk job at a local MSP, which will be their first IT position. Congrats, Lil Shep. Hoobastank Pilgrim passed their OSEP exam, OSEP, which is the Offensive Security Experience Penetration Tester exam. Congratulations, Hoobastank Pilgrim. Our friend Robin C. passed the CCSP exam, the Certified Cloud Security Professional exam. Great job, Robin. Zanidia passed their ENWLSD to achieve their CCMP. I had to look it up. It's the Designing Cisco Enterprise Wireless Networks. So awesome job nailing your CCMP as a wireless professional. If you'd like to join our free Discord community of over 2,000 members who are all there to help each other in their IT and life journey, you can check it out at artofneteng.com/IAATJ, which stands for It's All About the Journey. It's an awesome place. Check it out. If you're looking for a community, it's a great place to start. We have new Patreons joining us this week: Greg Sider, Bob Steele, 412, and Michael Meldano. Thank you so much for your support. If you'd like to be a patron, if you'd like to be a patron of our show and snag sweet benefits like access to our live streams where you can watch us produce the show in real time and chat with us during recording sessions, ad-free versions of the show, merch discounts, and more, you can go to patreon.com/artofneteng and check out our different tiers of support. We truly appreciate all of your support, and it really helps us keep improving the quality of the show. Now back to the show.
This episode is sponsored by Itential, the leader in network and cloud automation, and I'm very excited to introduce our guest this evening, Peter Sprygada. Peter, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, Peter, can you give us a quick intro? Who you are? What do you do?
Sure. Yeah. And I'll start you off by correcting you already. It's Sprygada.
I knew it.
It's my bad.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
It's all good. It's all good. It's all good.
I should have typed that in my intro there.
Hey, believe me, you're not the first, and you won't be the last. So, I've had all kinds of interesting enunciations over the years. So anyway, yeah, Peter Sprygada is indeed my name. I am currently vice president of product management at Itential, which essentially means that I have all the responsibility and absolutely no authority to do anything. But it does give me the opportunity to come on shows like this and chat. But honestly, well, yes, I'm sitting in a product management role at Itential. In reality, I've got a very long and storied history, building networks. I've done it on the vendor side. I've done it in the software side. I've done it on the operator side. I've done it throughout my whole career. And so, it's I'm really excited to be here, and we're talking about one of my absolute most favorite topics in the world. So it should be a fantastic time.
All right. So marketing's in the title, but you have engineering roots.
I do. I can actually trace. So I trace a couple of different roots. I can trace software development roots all the way back to writing COBOL code on an IBM mainframe. In fact, I was part of the. I had my original workstation was a virtual machine that sat on an IBM S360.
Oh my gosh!
So I've been doing virtualization since the beginning of my career. But I made the leap out of software development, got into networking very early, and I actually started in the world of installing TDM switches for a contractor for Lucent Technologies.
Oh, wow.
If any of y'all remember that name.
Yeah.
And I started installing TDM switches, and then I followed a very traditional network engineering career path through the SP rank. So ATM frame relay and core IP, MPLS. Made the jump over to data center. I was, at Cisco at Arista at a whole bunch of different startups, for quite a long time doing engineering and operations. And, then decided I'd take a chance and joined this little unknown startup by the name of Ansible. And had a hell of a wild ride there, and it culminated in my current role here at Itential now.
So wait, you joined them like early on, Ansible?
I was actually I actually was part of I was part of Ansible before they got acquired by Red Hat.
Huh.
Wow. I'm thinking I was the number 6 or number 7 core developer.
Wow.
That was actually officially hired on. So
No big deal. Or anything.
No, not at all. Not at all. They specifically hired me to both build and so I actually had a dual role at Ansible. I actually wrote all the code initially for network automation that they did. That was all my code, so you can blame me for all of that crap. That's all my fault. I take responsibility for that first wave. But then I actually held the dual role. I was actually my own product manager, which is kind of interesting because I would get into these fights with myself. It was really ugly, right? Because the engineer and me would be like, we're doing it this way. And the product manager's like, no, I need it this way for the customer. So that was a lot of fun. I had a great time. But so that's a little bit about my background.
Oh my gosh. That is
so
cool.
when was Ansible? I'm just looking for time frame.
Oh gosh. 2012? No. Okay. 2012 is when I started in network automation.
So wait, did you make $1 bajillion from being like employee number 6 at Ansible?
Yeah, I've got all kinds of stacks and stacks of paper and say I've got $1 bajillion. That's awesome. I love it. And I can, I can give it away, but no, I actually started with Ansible in 2015 is when I joined Ansible. So Ansible had already been around as a company for, a little over a year, I guess. But I predated, like I said, the Red Hat acquisition. And Red Hat acquired us, and I actually ascended to the role of distinguished engineer at Red Hat, which I am very proud of.
Yeah.
Achieving that role at a company like Red Hat is no small feat, and I am something I am very proud of, to this day. But yeah, so I was with Red Hat, and I was actually through the IBM acquisition, and left about a year after IBM had acquired Red Hat for no reason other than it was just time for me to move on and do something
new.
Yep.
So I want to go back a little bit. One of the questions we kind of start with is how did you get into network engineering, right? Like when did you find out you kind of had the spark or interest in IT tech and network engineering?
Gosh, wow. It goes all the way back to, as I said, right, kind of that first job I had was a mainframe programmer, and I got involved in this project. And in this particular project, we were connecting, and for all your old time listeners, they'll appreciate this. We were connecting a network for SAA gateway, which allowed PC LANs running, 3270 emulation from Attachmate, was the big company back then, big software company, to emulate green screens and have terminal sessions into the mainframe. So anyway, I got involved in this project, and we were deploying Wellfleet routers to do SNA networking at the time. And so I got to know some of the guys that were doing it, and I was just enthralled by it. I mean, just enthralled by it. And that's kind of where the story began for me. So I actually ended up leaving my programming job. I ended up joining the network team there. And that's really what started my career. And then very shortly thereafter, I got hired on at like I said, the contracting company that installed TDM switches. And from there, everything just took off. And it was a great ride. I mean, I still do it. I'm still involved in networking as much as I can be. I still follow the industry. I still follow, prevailing designs and, what's going on in the industry. And then, of course, certainly now from the programmability standpoint, I'm deeply involved in what goes on in networking.
So for anybody listening, could you briefly explain SNA?
SNA, Systems Network Architecture. It is the protocol, and it is a whole protocol stack. It's not one protocol. It is a whole stack, a whole 7-layer stack. But SNA networking was really all about how do we connect at the time, which were PC LANs. And a lot of companies back then, they viewed these as toys, right? These were just kind of, if you weren't on a green screen, that was the real, deal, right? The PC, the LANs, that was, that was the hippie kids, right? That was all the, the newbies, the kids stuff, doing things. Kind of like how, I look at cloud today. No, I'm just joking. I'm just joking. I'm very big into cloud, but no. So anyway, it was a whole protocol stack that essentially talked about how you connected to big iron, whether that was an IBM mainframe, whether it was, or a mainframe by anyone. It didn't have to be IBM. There were other mainframe manufacturers out there, but it was a whole protocol stack about how you did that.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. And throughout your career, did you achieve any, IT networking certifications?
I did. In fact, I can, I had a number of them, I mean, gosh, I had a whole wall of them at one point, but really the culmination of it, I did, at one point, I did hold a CCIE service provider.
Wow.
That is true. Yeah.
That's a beast.
I did have that. I've since let it lapse. And be fair, I don't want to claim for having something I no longer have, but I did have it. I had it for quite a few years. And I was very proud of that. It was, as I'm sure, most of your listeners know, as I'm sure you guys know, I mean, that's a dedication, right?
Yeah.
It takes dedication.
Was it as bad as you hear it is? Like, was it just 2 years of hell? Like, to get it all the way
yeah. No. Oh, absolutely it was. And then some.
Yeah.
Honestly, it was, I mean, I shouldn't say it like that. It's hard to say. Was it hell? No, because I loved it, right? I mean, I loved it. What was hell, and which I think everyone can appreciate, is how do you balance life when you're trying to get that certification? And by the way, you still got your job to do, right? Your day job.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what made it hell, was just trying to balance all of those facets and not let any one of them slip.
Did you pass it the first time?
So Peter, continuing the career chat, you mentioned a few times that you hit a point where you just understood that it was time to move on. How did that come to be? Was it different things? Was it just you started getting an interest elsewhere? How did that culminate for you?
It was, I don't know if there's a one size fits all answer to this. In some cases, it was following a technology progression. Luckily, I made some really good bets, in the course of my career. I saw, for instance, I saw the oncoming, packet revolution, back when I was very much involved in ATM and frame relay. I saw what was going on with packet and made that decision early on to move into the packet world, and that paid off huge dividends for me. Some of them were, making the move from, when I was doing core service provider networking, making the transition over to data center. That one was more of, okay, I kind of had been doing service provider networking for so long, I just wanted something new, and this was back when data center was the new hotness. This is about the time that I went over to Arista, and it was the hotness, and so it was something new, but I learned, and what was fascinating when you start following these technology progressions is a lot of it starts to repeat itself just in different ways. A lot of what we did in ATM frame relay, we redid in core IP, that we redid again in data center. It had new names. We certainly made improvements on it. I don't want to say it was a perfect replacement, but it was kind of starting to rehash the old things over and over and over again, right? Centralized versus decentralized versus centralized in terms of how you think about control plane or network management or et cetera. But I think the one that was, that really kind of changed the trajectory of my career was when I made that decision to go to Ansible. That was a big one. That was when I actually left the I guess you'd say the industry networking, the networking industry proper, right? I was no longer working for a networking equipment vendor, and went to a software company that was trying to break into networking. And that was a big leap of faith. And I'm glad I did it.
I often forget.
Yeah, sounds exciting. And I was thinking it in my head, and Jordan also put it in the chat here as well. Everything old is new again.
Yeah, exactly. With no question about it. It's the ideas. I think part of it is because there's only so many original ideas out there, right? When you start thinking about networking, it's what we do is it's this pendulum that keeps swinging back and forth and back and forth, and it swings too far one way and it slowly works back to center, and then someone swings it the other way and it eventually slowly works back to center. And I think that's I've learned that seems to be a lot of the cyclical nature of technology, which isn't to say, and I don't want this ever to come off as sounding like I'm pessimistic about technology. I'm not. I'm very, very optimistic about technology and where it's going. But you start to see patterns repeat themselves for sure.
I often forget that Ansible is more than just a network automation company.
That's right. Yeah. when I started there, it was not networking automation in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
So
very good. Go ahead, Andy.
Well, you said leap of faith, and you just struck a chord with me, because I recently just took a leap of faith, and we just did a whole episode.
That's Andy's middle name.
Yeah, but I don't know. I feel like that's kind of on the rare side. Like, if you talk to all these people, like they stay in their lane, they know what they're good at, and that's what they do, and they keep starting up to do things. Like, why? What drove that leap of faith? I mean, it's a big pivot, right? To go from what you were doing to like, well, now I'm going to go to a software company and we're going to build stuff. Like, what was, because that's scary, right? Or it can be. I mean, did you just?
Oh, absolutely. It was terrifying.
Terrifying. Were you pushed away from what you were doing? Or were you drawn to, like, how would you frame it to take that leap of faith?
Yeah, there was a couple of things here. One is, obviously I have some roots in software, and I continue to write code to this day. It's something I enjoy. It's very relaxing for me. But one thing that I noted is through the progression of my career, I did take a couple of stints where I left the kind of the vendor side of the equation, and I was on the customer side, and so I had the opportunity to be, in the trenches in engineering and operations, and which, I mean, Tim, I absolutely loved your intro. I mean, I think I lived through that maintenance window. That was fantastic. In fact, I was starting to wonder if maybe you had one of my old mops sitting around and that's what you were reading. It was, having been through that, though, I quickly identified, what automation could be in the networking space. So that was one thing that really drove me to make that leap of faith. I had been experimenting at the time with Puppet, and before I made the leap over to Ansible. And in fact, and then I got involved with in a tool called CF Engine. I don't know if how many people are going to recognize that name, but CF Engine was in a lot of respects the original automation play in terms of what came out around promise theory, which is really what is the foundation or the basis for a lot of what Puppet and Chef were originally designed around. Of course, they went off in different directions and it exceeded quite a bit, but CF Engine actually goes all the way back to 92. And it was actually a C-based application. So it had to be compiled on different platforms that you were running on. And I was at Arista at the time, and so I was working actually on compiling CF Engine so it would run on Arista EOS. But anyway, so I got really excited about working with this technology, and so that was part of what drove me. But then the other part that really drove me is the realization that I couldn't achieve what I was trying to achieve by working for a network equipment vendor. I was really struggling because I was so passionate about what network automation could be, but unfortunately, you start to get pigeonholed sometimes. Right? When you come from that vendor side, sometimes you're pigeonholed for the good and sometimes you're pigeonholed for the bad. In this case, I was pigeonholed for the bad. And so I had the opportunity to go to Ansible. I got to know the team there really well, a really great group of guys and gals. And I'm really glad I took that leap of faith.
And what year was this? I feel like it's kind of early on. I mean, I don't want to say automation is just taking off recently, but this was quite a few years ago, right?
And when I made the trip to Ansible, it was 2015. When I actually started with Puppet on Arista, that dates all the way back to 2012. So yeah, I've been doing network automation, strictly network automation now for almost 10 years.
And that's long before everybody was screaming it from the mountaintops, right? You were.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Back then, network automation was EMS.
Yeah,
that's what network automation was back then. The idea of automating networks really didn't exist. It was, it was still, and I realize there are still some in this boat today. But I mean, network automation was how good could you copy and paste from your MOP document to your CLI? I mean, that was network automation back in 2012.
Sounds like my whole career in network engineering.
And I think,
until you accidentally paste into the wrong terminal window, and then all hell breaks loose. But
I think early
now
on
you're reading into my past now, Peter.
I think early on too, network automation was probably more focused to large data center, service provider, and probably less so enterprise networks, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. You are correct, and I don't want to necessarily say network automation didn't exist, because it actually did. If you go back to the old days of the service provider, the TDM world, the ATM frame relay world, they were all built on automation.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't called that back then, but they were really built on that concept. For anyone who's ever experienced, deploying an ATM network, I mean, back then, right, the management system was the brains of the network. The nodes were really kind of stupid. They would come up and they would download their entire config from a centralized EMS system or centralized management system. That's how a lot of the ATM and frame relay networks work.
Wow.
And then we realized, what happens when it can't get to the NMS? Then what happens? Or what happens when you end up in a race condition and neither side can figure out who's in charge? There were literally cases where you had to reboot the network to kind of get it back in sync. So it was interesting times. But I think that you start to play that out, and it's really exciting to see where network automation has come in the last 10 years. I mean, it is really, we have a long way to go. There is no question about it. But I think we've certainly come a very, very long way. The fact that we're even having these conversations, is really exciting.
And I guess we'll get into this as we progress, but it's always been a scary thought for me that, we're taking the brains out of the gear, out of the iron, and putting it in a controller somewhere. Like you had said, like, what if it falls over? What if they can't reach each other?
Yep.
I mean, I'm guessing since 2012, since you've been into this, have these things been addressed? If we hand all the intelligence over to this other centralized place and that falls over, is that where we get into like redundancy and you have a pair of things that if one falls over and do you know what I mean? Like, isn't there a concern?
Yeah, I do.
Because once you take once you remove that control plane and put it somewhere else, it's a single point of failure, right? Theoretically.
Right. Correct. No, well, not even in real life. It is not even just theoretically, but I don't think we'll actually get there. I think that I'm hoping we've got enough sense to learn, some from some of our past, mistakes. And, we all, a lot of us can probably at least remember, when the original SDN hype started, right? We were going to have, an open flow showed up on the scene, and all of a sudden, right, it was all going to be about programming these devices, and literally your brain was going to be centralized. So I don't believe that's where we're going to land. I think that what we're really seeing in this space is we're really starting to come to an understanding that networking needs to be more than just simply packets ingress to egress of a box. Networking, and a lot of us carry the title of systems engineer. Okay, and this is one that I love to touch on a bit because I think it really talks to the whole story. And if you think about the root of that, systems engineer, the whole idea is to architect a system, not to architect a node. And I think that as this thing continues to expand and proliferate into various organizations, my belief is that we're going to be running, and we are running in a lot of respects, a very large distributed system. Right? It's not going to be about a centralized brain and a dumb node. No, it all has to work together. And I think that's that's where we're marching to, or at least that's my belief of it. Not everyone has that belief though, and there's a lot of varying opinions about this. There are a lot of individuals and organizations that are building products around this idea that you have to really centralize all of the operational and state data and config data, and that's the only way you can achieve automation. And I don't believe that, and I think that that's a recipe for disaster, because I think it does take us down that path.
Sounds like a vendor lock-in kind of argument, right? You need our proprietary system that only works with our proprietary iron. I mean, right?
And there's the challenge, right? Because nothing keeps the vendor in check, right? And that's the real problem here. We now, disclaimer, I work for a software company, so in fairness,
sure.
But that being said, right? I think that we are into we're at the nascent stages of a very exciting new world, in that for the first time in networking, or maybe not the first time, but for the first time in a long time, that companies can now start to think about, what is it I want to achieve from my operational model, and then go find the right parts and products and services to achieve that. It used to be, right, I've designed a network, and now I got to kind of form fit, or I got to force fit my operational model into the tooling my vendor will give me. And it's no longer that case. We put a lot of power back into the designers, the operators, to really run the infrastructure the way they want it run.
Yeah, the tooling my vendor will give me.
I mean, that was the way it used to be. It's like, and the sad state, think about this for a minute. So we're sitting here in we just rolled into 2022, and it's fascinating the number of organizations that are still struggling with, how do I do backup of my network devices?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's crazy to see the organizations that still struggle with the basics.
I mean, it has something to do with automation, but it's like, holy smokes. And I don't know if y'all are familiar with the 3-2-1 concept of backups, but right, the concept is simply, I should have 3 copies of my data in 2 separate locations, one of which should be offsite, right? I would venture to say a significant number of organizations don't even meet that minimum criteria in terms of backing up just their current routers and switch configurations.
It's probably in 2 different places.
Yeah, it's probably It's
well,
your laptop and your laptop and your laptop.
I was going to say it's in 2 places. It's in the running config and the startup config.
No doubt, exactly.
I would,
and hopefully those are the same.
But now because of COVID, it's finally offsite. Because it's
exactly.
I see what you did there.
Exactly right. All right, so we found a positive for COVID. No.
I would venture to say, here's my theory, is that because too many places are trying to do too many things with not enough resources, and maybe that's part of what automation can help solve. But in all the places I've been, there's just too much work, not enough people, and you can barely keep up with documentation, right? You build something and like, oh God, I got to get this, documentation updated for operations before I hand it off to, but then these 3 other things come up that are super high priorities. And so, I can remember looking for a config backup and finding out that like they hadn't been backed up in months. Now, the system was in place and it was all supposed to be working, but whatever, like something fell offline, a server stopped, whatever. So you could even have the system in place and it stopped working, but nobody checks. And so, hopefully, I mean, that's what it seems like to me. Like, if automation can solve some of that stuff, back your things up, do 3, 2, 1, and check every day to make sure it's working. And if it's not, email somebody, right? Because otherwise you have to go look, like me. And I'm like, well, hell, I don't have a current config. Now what am I going to do? So
I think you start to ask the question though. Very few people. There are pockets out there. I'm not denying that, but I would say by and large, most network engineers or operators, see the value of automation right now. Whether they're doing it at scale, whether they're doing it for everything, different topic. But I think we all agree that there's value there right now. I think the new challenge is, how do you make it accessible? Right? It's one thing to recognize I need it or I want it or I can benefit from it, but how do I make it accessible? And I think that is where we're starting to see one area where we're starting to see a lot of emphasis and advancement in the industry. If at the risk of having tomatoes thrown at me, but that is one of the unique things that Itential is doing, right? We're really focusing on how do we make automation accessible to the masses. It cannot be. I mean, I've got a background in software development. I'm very comfortable writing code, but I also understand that I'm probably a norm I'm probably a minority in the networking industry.
Yeah.
Right. In fact, I would venture to say there's a significant number of folks who got into networking because they took, CS 101 at their local college and said, this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. I do not want to sit here and write code 8 hours a day. So I think we have to recognize that, and it cannot be just simply all about network automation means I'm writing code. And I think that's where we're starting to see, very slowly, but we're starting to see that pendulum move again.
Well, that's why I loved Ansible so much. Like AJ ran an Ansible demo for us because I'm one of those guys that's like, oh God, automation, Python. I failed out of computer science forever ago, right? So when he Ansible was a much easier lift for me. I was like, oh wait, I can write some YAML files. Like,
absolutely.
So I mean, I really personally, I like tools that, for a network guy who has avoided software, has, writing code his whole life, to give me tools that make it accessible to, an easier lift, get me in the game, let me automate something and get excited about it and not have to spend 6 months trying to learn, lists from dictionaries, from for loops, because to me, it's just for whatever reason, I have a hard time getting the programmatic stuff in my head. Although there's so many resources now. I mean, there's there's everywhere you turn, there's another class, there's so much stuff out there to learn, which is great. Free resources too.
There's tons of stuff out there. I think the industry has done a fantastic job making, resources and doing some knowledge sharing and just making things accessible. And I think that one thing I would always encourage every network engineer to do is, whether or not you're into programming, and I'm not here to say, yes, get into it, no, don't get into it, but I do encourage, whenever I talk with folks who say, help me in my career, help me understand, how to achieve, get to a place where I can do some of the things that you've done. And I always tell them, but it's worth it, excuse me, to take 1 or 2 introductory courses, even if you don't ever become a competent programmer, because it trains you in a way of thinking about things. And that part is, in a lot of respects, we do this in networking, we just don't realize it. But programming takes it even a step further, and it really forces you to take a very complex problem and break it down into very simple steps. We do this in networking, we just don't realize we do it sometimes. So anyway, I always encourage folks to at least, take that 1 or 2, classes, or that 1 or 2 things out online, or whatever it is, because you do get benefit out of it, even if you don't become a programmer as a result.
Absolutely.
So Peter, I don't want to make this chat just about software-defined networking, but I want to use it as an example. Yeah. So many organizations have adopted software-defined networking in one facet or another, and in multiple in some cases. So you may have a controller of the campus, a controller of the data center, a controller of your security fabric. Do you, in your crystal ball, do you see more third parties going after that market as a way of tying those different controllers together? Is that something that Itential's can do or has on track to do? What are your thoughts there?
So if I think about it, just kind of strictly from the basis of your question, the wonderful thing about controllers is it's another way to create vendor lock-in, right? If I can put a controller there and make the interface from that controller to the end device proprietary so that no other controller can come in and do anything, yeah, it's another form of lock-in is what it is. And I think that's why you see a lot of it. Now, I don't want to say that's all bad. I mean, there's a lot of great functionality. I mean, if you look at for instance, what Meraki did, I think that they did a wonderful job with this and kind of turning what was a complex problem in terms of managing Wi-Fi access points into something much, much more manageable. So I think some good has come of it, but I do believe that specifically if I put my Itential hat back on for just a moment, I do think that there is opportunity out there, and I think that this is an area where you'll see that Itential continues to make investments, because we understand that there is no such thing as a source of truth. Okay,
Wait
and that's
a
probably
minute.
going to be a bit of a
Hold
controversial
on.
statement.
Wait, hold on. You're the
That's the
automation guy.
opposite of everything everybody's told me. How dare you?
I love it. There we go. So I woke everybody up. There is no such thing as a source of truth. What there is a such thing is there's many sources of truth. And I think that when you start to understand that and you start to adopt that, your sources of truth live all over the place, right? They live in your IPAM, they live in your DNS, they live in your inventory, right? They live on your device, they live all over. And I think that it's a bit of a fool's errand to actually believe that I'm going to take all of that and consolidate that into one data structure. I'm going to come up with one model that's going to work for me for everything I'm ever going to want to do, right? Insert open config here and see how well that's solved that problem. I think that this is where Itential's big focus is. It's saying, look, we recognize that there is, value in all of that data, but it's only valuable if you're getting the data from its source instead of dealing with shadow copies and whatnot of that data. And so that's where we continue to make investments to make it very easy and very accessible for customers to be able to stitch all of that data together for the purposes of achieving an end-to-end use case.
So would you say that Itential's products are aggregators of those sources of truth, or they just have a way to go get what they need when they need it?
Yeah, it's more about our ability to go get what we need when we need it. It's all about, and let me draw a bit of a parallel to kind of, I think, hammer this home. It's always tough to do this right when you're listening. If I had a whiteboard, this would all make sense. But if you think about sitting in a meeting with network engineers, right? We've all been in a meeting prior to the days of COVID when we actually sat around a table. That was a novel concept, right? You barely could ever, if you're having a meeting about network design, about a problem, whatever, I would venture a guess that you can't get 10 minutes into that meeting before someone's going to set up from the table, walk over to the whiteboard and start drawing the network, right? Yep. And from that point forward, the entire focus of the meeting is going to be that whiteboard, and people are going to continue drawing on it, right? Another person may come over and they're going to draw a bit to the whiteboard. Someone else is going to come and they're going to draw a bit to the whiteboard. And what they're doing is they're describing a process, whatever that process may be, right? I got my IP address from over here. I had to make an insert into my DNS over here. And you've got different people sitting at the table, and they're all contributing to this whiteboard. Now, take that visualization, take that concept, and apply it to what Itential is trying to do. We have built a product that allows you to visually design that workflow and be able to have all of those teams come together and each provide their piece of the whole picture, so that at the end of the day, you can hit go and you get a full end-to-end delivery of a use case. But it's not one person sitting down and writing a code. It's everyone contributing to that whiteboard with their own sources of their truth, with their own ways of doing things, with their own inputs and outputs, et cetera. And that's really the focal point of what we're doing at Itential and what we continue to drive with our platform.
Okay, before we dive too deep into Itential here, there was one question I had to ask you. So you pivoted once again in your career where you went from networking to software, and now you're in marketing. Was that pivot as big and scary as the networking to software development?
Oh gosh, it was probably bigger. I mean, holy smokes, right? Talk about ripping the training wheels off. The beauty of, when you're technical, you always have that to fall back on, right? And I think we all understand that. When you're technical, you always have that to fall back on. When you make that transition to whether you're moving into management, whether you're moving into leadership roles, whether you're moving into sales, whether you're moving into product management or marketing, now you're starting to leave some of that training wheel behind in a big way, because now it's not about what can I do at the keyboard. It's what can my brain come up with. And absolutely, it was one of the more scary, easily the most scary pivot I made. Unfortunately or fortunately, again, depending on how you want to look at it, I'm one of those bizarre engineers that loves to get on things like this and talk, or put me on a stage and I'll talk all day long, right, about it, because I just love the technology and I love talking about it. And it was a very natural thing for me to kind of gravitate towards.
Very cool. Very
But
cool.
yes, it was very scary.
I asked that somewhat selfishly because of, the content creator in me and the tech engineer in me. I just want to combine the two and do that for my job. But we'll see how this pans out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I get it. No question about it. But if you think about it, right, and especially anyone who's designed networks, there is a substantial amount of creativity involved there.
Oh yeah. Sure.
I mean, yes, you're using a lot of prevailing designs, but we've all been faced with those problems, whether it's constraint on the design or a constraint of the application or a budgetary constraint, whatever it is. We've had to get creative, and it's amazing. When I talk with a lot of networking professionals, and they'll make comments like, oh, I'm not creative, or I don't have, I'm engineering, very focused. I'm like, are you really? Let's talk through that a little bit, because I think a lot of network engineers have that creative component to them.
And that's how we got to the art of network engineering.
Hey, there it is.
So I think now seems as good a time as any. Can you tell us who is Itential? How did they get their start? Give us a little background on Itential, the company.
Yeah, so Itential's been around for, gosh, almost 7 years now. A lot of people don't know that, but we're very still, we're still very young in terms of a company, even though we're 7 years into this. A lot of that is due to the industry that we're in. We focus on building network and cloud automation. That's what we focus on doing. So and it's kind of like how I just described it, right? It's this idea that we have this belief out there that sources of truth live everywhere. Right? There is no one source of truth. There's many sources of truth. And in order for an organization to be successful, they have to be able to easily tap into all of those sources of truth. We also believe very strongly that automation has to be, and tooling around automation has to be accessible. Not everyone's going to sit down and open VS Code or Vim if you're like me, or Emacs, or Notepad. I don't care, right? Not everyone's going to sit down and just start writing code. It's not to say one's right or wrong, not to say one is better or worse. It is to say, though, that if we don't make this technology accessible, then it's never going to really catch on, and it's never really going to be what it could be, to network operators. So that's the other big element of what we're doing at Itsential, is making it accessible. I think the third thing that we're doing is we're trying very hard, and I'm going to use a vendorism here, because we're all going to have heard the same thing I'm about to say, but we try very hard not to have a technology religion. We try very hard to be a tool that allows customers to build and orchestrate network workflows, but do it by bringing their practices, their tools, their ways of doing things. In other words, we're not going to walk in the door and say, I want you to forget everything you've learned up to now, get rid of all of your tribal organic knowledge, right? You need to sit down, learn our tool, learn our way of doing it, and we are now the center of your world, right? That doesn't work anymore. And if you need a great reference, go look at circa, in the 90s, Network Node Manager from HP. That's a great example of that, right? It had to be the center of the world, because if it wasn't, it didn't work. And we're trying really hard not to do that. So, if you've got your investment in Ansible, great, bring it along. We work with it. If you're using Terraform, fantastic, let's do it. If you decided to go down the custom development path, wonderful, we can work with that. If you've got API-enabled devices, hey, no problem. All of that works with our system. What we're doing is giving you those tools to allow you to now orchestrate across the entire implementation. The last thing I'll say about it, and I think it's maybe the most important point, is that automation, network automation has to be more than just the execution of automation, right? Because there's more to it than that. When you look at Ansible, and I mean, I love Ansible. I have a very, to this day, I mean, I'm very proud of the work we did at Ansible, and I think it's a fantastic tool. But Ansible focuses on the execution of automation. If we think about a network change, and that's why I love Tim's intro so much, because you think about there's all kinds of things that have to happen before you start automating. Then there's the act of the automation, and then there's a whole bunch of stuff that has to happen after, right? At the beginnings, I have to get my addressing from my IPAM. I have to get information from inventory. I have to do a bunch of pre-checks on my network. I got to make sure that I'm ready to go. Now I can make my change, and then, oh yeah, guess what? There's a whole bunch of things that got to happen on the backside before that automation can be considered done, complete, and successful. And that's really where our focus is.
So wait, Itential can run pre and post checks for me?
Itential can run, so you can run your own pre and post checks, but Itential gives you the ability to build it right into the workflow. And that's the point.
That sounds nice. Sorry, Tim, go ahead.
Oh, no problem. Peter, you talked a few minutes ago about it being more than just one person at the whiteboard,
that's right,
if you will, and being multiple teams, multiple sources of truth. With most, I shouldn't say most, with many organizations being siloed in the IT teams, who do you usually work with? Who's coming to you for help? Is it primarily network teams at first, system teams, IT teams in general? What does it look like?
Oh, it's network teams for sure. It's network teams. Now, The question is, but which network teams, right? And I think that's kind of the crux of your question. And to some degree, it's all, and it just all depends. But think about any good-sized enterprise today in networking, right? Typically, you're going to have probably a group that manages the core. Now, let's think about it like a global enterprise right now, right? You're going to have a team that manages the core network, right? And those guys are probably mostly still manual driven, a lot of CLI, right? They're kind of the old guys like me, right? They've been doing it a long time. They don't need these newfangled tools, right? They know exactly what they need to do. They know how to type out the CLI commands, whatnot. But then you've got a different team that maybe is managing your SD-WAN deployment, right? They're part of the network team now. Then maybe you have another team that is handling your data center, right? And they've got a whole different scenario, right? Because they're trying to run things at scale. They got to move fast. They can rubber stamp out their devices. Then you got a whole nother networking team. They're doing stuff in the cloud, because we all know network engineers don't do cloud, right? No, of course they do. They have to, right? That's the reality of the world we live in today. It's not just my CLI-based device anymore. It's now an API device. It's a controller-based device. It's stuff running in the cloud. All of that is networking now, and we need tools. And this is where Itential really focuses on building a platform that allows us to do that horizontally across all of those types of implementations.
So let's talk about that platform. Is this a on-premises platform? Is this a cloud platform?
Yes.
How? Yes. Good answer. Why? Yes, it is.
I mean, really, you're going to ask a product manager that question? Of course, it's yes. No. So yes, Itential got its start as a traditional premises implementation. So we have really two components. We have the Itential Automation Platform, which really focuses on orchestrating network change. This is that end-to-end whiteboard I keep talking about that we can plug anything into. And then we have a secondary product called Itential Automation Gateway. And really that's its sweet spot, is really to provide API functionality on top of non-API implementations. So think of it this way. Ansible is a playbook. It's not an API. Wouldn't it be great if I could put an API on top of the playbook that I've written and then plug that into a workflow?
Yeah.
That's what Itential is doing with Platform and Gateway. Like I said, it is a traditional on-premises application, although earlier this year we announced for the first time that we are moving into the cloudy world. We're moving into the software world. So our first iteration of that is we've delivered a PaaS around the Itential Automation Platform. So a customer can run Itential Automation Platform on Itential's cloud, get all the benefits. It's the same platform that they could install on-prem. It's just now running in the cloud, and relieves customers the burden of having to install it, manage it, and do all of the admin work associated with running a server.
Gotcha. Okay. Where does the cloud connection come in? If I am connecting to Azure AWS, you name it, how am I interfacing with that with Itential?
Well, one of the things couple of things in our workflow capabilities, and this is a decision that we made very early on. I'm glad we made it. I think it was the right decision. Is that we can consume APIs natively. And this is what differentiates us from, say, the Terraforms of the world, right? So you look at something like Terraform and even Ansible to that degree. I'll use Terraform as a little more prevalent in cloud, but Ansible would fall into this category. The challenge with some of these tools is that they're providing a abstraction on top of the API. Not the raw API capabilities. So AWS, Amazon publishes an API. Terraform comes through and they give you a whole bunch of modules that can consume that API, but it's whatever the designer decided that they would expose from that API, right? What we've done from an Itential standpoint is we said, let's take the abstractions, let's throw them away because they don't bring really any value. Let's just work with the raw API capabilities. So whether I want to, technically, if I wanted to, I could automate EC2 instances with Itential's automation platform. I can actually do that today easily. So the way we do that is we plug the API directly in, and we can do that really for any system. So whether it's cloud, whether it's controller, whether it's your coffee pot, if it's got an API, we can plug it right into our workflow designer, and we can design workflows across it. That's really the power of what we're doing from Itential's perspective. Now,
coffee as a service.
Absolutely. I mean, how is that not a thing, right? Oh wait, I guess it's just Uber going to Starbucks for me. But no, it's but I think that what we also do is we've made a pretty significant investment though, is just having a tool that does automation only gets you part of the way there. Right. This was even true with Ansible. Ansible is great, but the problem is Ansible is very a raw toolkit, right? You're going to sit down, you're going to write that playbook from beginning to end. And how many people are guilty, and be honest with yourselves, that you're using Ansible and you fall back into the same pattern that you had in the network space and you start copying and pasting? And you start with a playbook, you're like, oh, I got to write a new flow. Wait a minute, I got one close. Let me copy and paste it into my new playbook and make all the changes I want, right? I mean, that's the reality. It happens. What we're doing, one of the other elements that we're doing at Itential is we're making an investment in delivering what we call pre-builts. And these are essentially things you can plug directly into the automation platform that are predefined workflows that do common tasks. And when I say do common tasks, I mean right up to doing things like I want to do a software upgrade on an ASR 9K and do it in a very controlled way. These are the types of things that we're adding to the platform and are available to our customers that they can immediately plug in and immediately become functional doing things on their infrastructure.
Software upgrades via automation. Now you have my attention.
Andy's done a few of those, I hear.
So when you reload the thing and it gets kicked in a Ramon and takes a dump, then what? Does the automation know? I mean, I've been in places that we didn't want to automate software upgrades because there's just so many variables.
Yeah, and it's a fair point. I mean, there is, you can only automate to the extent that a system gives you the capability to automate it, right? The unfortunate part, and it makes me sad. Set automation aside for just a minute. It makes me sad in the networking industry that I mean, these are not problems that people don't know how to solve, right? Insert cloud and knit here, right? It's like we know how to solve these problems, but a lot of networking devices, unfortunately, are either too old or they just haven't been given the love that they need, or for various other reasons, and we can probably go through a whole litany of other reasons. Unfortunately, we have what we have in the networking space.
Yeah.
It's sad, but it is what it is. Now, I will say this though, by being able to control that workflow and be able to put as much upfront work into that, there is an awful lot of opportunity to put the checks and balances in place to hopefully make sure you don't get in that state. Right. I would never, the engineer in me says, don't ever say never, right? I mean, sure. I know that I've lived it too many times, right? The most foolproof system in the world is going to be the first to break. But nevertheless, hopefully we're at least starting to get a little bit smarter about these things.
So I think one of the biggest fears when you start talking automation, at least for network engineers, is, and Andy, you've brought this up before, I know I've brought it up before, is, okay, gosh, what do I got to learn now? What do I got to figure out next? Mm-hmm. Peter, can you kind of go into Itential's Automation Studio as far as being low code, drag and drop? Yep. What do people need to know day one to get started?
Before you do that, am I really exactly that whiny, right. Tim? Is that...
No, I said I did it too.
Sorry, Peter, go on.
Dang it. I love it. I need Dan here. I can't be Dan.
I think that hits to the heart of what I was kind of mentioning around, the accessibility of automation. So, what we've done at Itential is part of the platform is what we call Automation Studio, and that's exactly what it is. It's drag and drop concept. I can drag APIs onto my canvas. I can drag transformations onto my canvas so that I can transfer my input to the desired output. And this is that analogy I was drawing to the whiteboard, right? Just like in when we used to sit around in conference rooms and we all would go to the whiteboard and write our piece on it, and what you end up with is you end up with a schematic. Same concept with Automation Studio. It's just now it's being done on a canvas with drag and drop elements that are pointing at API endpoints. It's the idea, though, that we can build these workflows, through intuitive user interfaces, as opposed to someone having to drop down to text editors and encode it. And we can be just as powerful and achieve just as much going that direction.
I'm sorry, I might have phased out. So, what is Automation Studio? I mean, it sounds amazing.
Automation Studio is a component of the Itential Automation Platform. So the Itential Automation Platform is really three major components. It is our Automation Studio, which is our design element. This is where you design all of your workflows, and so you build your end-to-end workflow, whatever it is you're trying to do, and everything from start with a ticket to end with a Slack message, and everything that happens in between. It's the what we call operations manager, which is really the execution element side of platform, where it actually runs those workflows. And then we have a third element, which is config manager, and that is that's bringing intelligence to how you manage network device configurations. So that's your golden templates. How do you put rules in place that say, this line should be this line can never show up in a config, and be able to perform actions of that nature.
So that would catch mistakes, conceively, right? It'll look at your config and say, don't do that.
It can do.
Don't delete all the VLANs off a trunk, right?
My take on that has always been, it will do what you tell it to do.
Yeah.
So if you tell it to catch mistakes, and what you're telling it is the mistake to catch, then yes, it'll catch mistakes.
But that's pretty helpful, because I've always been exhausted in almost every maintenance window I've ever worked. Like, I'm not really my best self. So having some of that intelligence distributed and checking things for me, it sounds super helpful.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've lived through that as well. I mean, I can remember, and I'm sure a lot of folks can relate to this, right? You get done with a maintenance window. It's 2:33, 3:30, 4:30 in the morning. Maybe you got called into the maintenance window late. Maybe you had a couple of drinks with dinner, and now you're really struggling to get through this maintenance window, and you're exhausted by the time you get to the end of it. And now you got to sit there and stare and compare two configurations to figure out, is it back to what it should be,
right,
and not miss something. I mean, configurations aren't 10 lines, right? So, I think the other element that we're driving with configuration manager is also around the idea of generating configuration, and specifically what we call golden configs. And that's that ability to, we all do this naturally, but we've actually encoded it into features into the software, where you can chunk the config up into its various pieces and then reconstruct it at the end. Right. So there are parts of the config that we know go into every single device that's out there. I don't care what it is. Right. They all point to this syslog server. They all use this NTP setting, et cetera. Then there are pieces that are maybe regionally specific. Then there are pieces of the config that are locally significant. And so we actually provide an entire tool or entire UI as part of platform that allows you to build the config that way. And then we will construct the final config for a device that gets pushed out.
So when you go in, so there's existing configs in the environment, right, that you're going into.
Yep.
So does this consume those configs and then do what you just said, break them up into?
It can. Yeah, the two features work together. So you got the compliance as part of it, which is that's reading in the config and then applying all the rules and making sure everything is valid. And then you got the golden config, which is really all about how do I build a device configuration. So yes, it all works together at the end of the day.
So it can work on greenfield and brownfield. It's not like, oh, well, it's better for new deployment, but brownfield, how do we get all these configs to do it?
What changes is your starting point. Yeah, exactly. Greenfield, you're going to start with the golden config. Brownfield, you're going to start with compliance.
Okay.
So Peter, when you were first talking about Itential, you were, kind of pointing out like, well, if you're doing your own homegrown Python, if you're doing Ansible, Terraform, it does all these things. And I kind of thought for a second, well, this sounds like a solution for people who are already automating. But, as we've had this conversation, it sounds like too, if you're not yet doing automation, Itential could be what helps you get there.
Oh, absolutely. Call me right away. If that's the case. No. See, every time I slip, every once in a while, I slip into that marketing role. I can't help myself. No, in all seriousness, absolutely. I think that automation, network automation is an interesting thing from the aspect that I think a lot of organizations, they look at it a little more holistically than they need to. Automation doesn't have to be, I've automated my entire device config from soup to nuts for every device in my infrastructure. Automation can be as simple as, I want to make sure that I've got the right syslog server programmed on every single core network router, and I'm going to automate that. That can be one line, and I get value out of that. And so what I've, throughout my entire career, as I've always been doing this conversation I've always had with customers is that, start small. Get comfortable with the technology. The technology does you no good if you're not comfortable with it. If you don't trust it, if you're not comfortable with it, you're never going to embrace it. So start small. Simply automate one line in your config. Let that go for a month. Then come back and automate another line or two more lines, right? And grow into automation. Instead of looking at your config and saying, holy smokes, how am I going to build something that's going to automate, this 1,500 line, core router config?
Mm-hmm.
So
that's what I was just thinking. So Itential can help automate small shops up to very large places with a lot going
without
on.
question.
Right?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And we have customers that are very small in nature that use us. We have very, very large customers that use us that are doing tens of thousands of automations a day.
And I really appreciate the end-to-end approach in that it's more than just the change. It's the working with the ITSM solution. It's like you said, at the end, you can send a Slack message to make sure the team is updated that something's been done. I like that it's more than just, you've taken the approach of more than just the change. It's the entire change process. And I think a lot of network engineers and others can appreciate that.
It has to be. I mean, it's the only way it works in my mind. What good does it do me if all I'm doing is focusing on the execution of the change? If I still have to sit there and manually go, read the ticket from, I don't know, ServiceNow, and I got to manually go get a IP address from my API, and I got to manually go update inventory, and I got to, manually do all my pre-checks. I mean, that doesn't service anybody any good. And I think a lot of respects, what we're trying to do here, and the we in this context is really just the thought of network automation, right? The broader, what we're trying to do from an industry perspective is we're all about trying to buy time, right? There is no, I don't want to say there's not as much value in making the change as there is in understanding what change needs to be made and how you go about making that change. So if we can free up a user's time, a network engineer's time, so that they can stay more focused on what's the change I need to make or how do I go about the change versus actually executing the change, that's a big win. That's a big win for the engineer. That's a big win for the engineer's company. That's a big win for the entire industry in my mind. I'm guessing, and I will, I'll go out on a limb on this one, but I'm going to guess none of us got into the networking industry, myself included, so they could sit there all day and type no VLAN 100 on 300 switches.
No.
Yeah, that's I mean, that's the true value, right? Is just the scale. I remember we've talked about it before. I had an SNMP location string I had to update on a scad ton of devices, and yeah, like old school me, right? I'd have to log into each one by one and do it.
Yep.
And it's awful. You got small environment, not that big, but not that big of a deal, home lab, whatever. But yeah, go update on, 350 devices. Like, oh my God.
Absolutely.
And then when somebody shows you how it can be automated, like, oh, here's a little bit of thing, and you do this and you pull that, you press one button and watch the magic happen. Like, again, I go back to AJ's, demo that he did. He's done a couple automation demos for me. I'm just like, oh my God. But I needed that oh my God moment, because prior to that, it was just all way too abstract and coding scary. But then when I saw how me sitting in the chair operating a network, and like, oh, I get it now. I don't have to log in and copy and paste a stupid command into 350 devices.
That's right. That's exactly right.
It's magical. I like magic.
So Peter, I have to ask one of my favorite questions for folks that have any sort of tie to like network automation. You have quite a storied history in network automation specifically. So
Mhm.
how do you recommend any network engineer get started with it?
Oh, that's a dirty question. You should have warned them.
Just do it. I mean,
Yeah.
just do it. No, I mean, I kind of touched on it already, right? Start small.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how I always tell people: start small. You don't need to go boil the ocean. You don't need to go automate your entire network. You don't even need to go automate your entire device configuration. Just start something small and get comfortable with the technology, because two things are happening at once, right? One, you're learning to automate, and automate is an action, right? It's not. I think I've talked a lot about this in the past, right? It's not a product. It's right. It's an action. So get comfortable automating, and then get comfortable with the tools. And don't be afraid to try different tools and try different approaches, right? The network automation market is so vast right now. I mean, yeah, everybody is talking about network automation in one form, fashion, or another. So there's a lot of differing ways and a lot of different approaches to doing it. So, what I always recommend is, try out different things. Be comfortable with the technology, and I think that's how you get started with this, because you will have, and I think Andy put it perfectly, right? You will eventually have that aha moment, and when you do, it's a beautiful thing. It really is. I had mine 10 years ago, and it was fantastic, and everyone will have it if you just give it time.
So can we beat up on Python for just a moment?
Yeah, let's do it.
But related
do it.
but related to what AJ just asked. So, find your pain point. For me, it was SNMP location updates on a bajillion devices. So that's my use case. So now I know, okay, this is because now I have skin in the game. This is going to help me, make my life better. I'm not going to have to go through all that pain. It could be a 6-hour maintenance window, logging in all that crap one by one, right? Let's do it in 20 minutes. So the challenge that I have had and continue to have is Python is a tool, right, that I could do that with. So as a network engineer without a software background, how much Python do I need to know? And this might not be a question you can ask, but the challenge I keep having is, there's Python for network engineering, like curriculum. There's 100 Days of Code, where it's like, well, don't do any network engineering, but learn a bunch of Python. And there's those two schools of teaching. And for me, I'm like, well, I just want to get it to, log into a device and blast this line in and save it and do a quick validation. But I've always had a hard time. So I'm beating up on Python because I never really know how much, how much Python does a guy who's never done Python need to learn to automate one line of code at 300 devices, right? Like, it should be easy. It shouldn't be a big deal. But then you're like, well, there's 300 courses I can take. Some of them are geared toward me. Some of them aren't. And depending on who you ask, some people say, no, learn the basics, the fundamentals. Don't worry about networking yet, because you have to know all the mechanical. So it's just been a pain point for me. I've had such a hard time with Python because I get in there, I start studying, and then I'm like, but when do I get to the point when I push the magic button, So is there a question in there? Do we have to cut that out? Did that make no sense?
Well, think about it like this. Let me try this. Think about it this way. You have to start with what it is you're trying to accomplish, right? There's no one right answer to this question, right? If your goal is to become a Python developer, you're going to take a very different approach to this than, all my goal is I just want to see this work.
Yeah.
I want to log into a device and run show version. If all I ever do is that, I'm happy. Right. And so I think that's the starting point has to be honest with yourself about what you want out of what it is you're trying to do. That's the starting point. From there, then you've got this whole sea of stuff out there. I think that imitation is the greatest form of flattery. We've all heard it, right? And I do believe that. With the amount of code that we have out there now today, it would be challenging for you not to be able to go find something that doesn't mimic what it is you're trying to do. Maybe it's not exact, but it's pretty close. Right. And so if all you're trying to do is that one simple command, go beg, borrow, and steal from the open source community. That's what makes open source so great.
And that's the third point people make is like, oh, just go find it and do it. But then I don't understand what I'm doing. But I think you said just SSH into a box and do a show ver. Like, I've never done that in Python. Maybe that's a good start for me, right?
That's right. Yeah. That's right. It's all about the basics for sure.
Right.
I will say this, unless your intention is to get into development as a profession, sitting down and learning the basics, right, and getting into what's a string and what's an int and what's a dictionary and what's a list, that's useless. Who cares?
But everybody in networking
that
is
point.
learning this stuff, and you feel like you're at a disadvantage. You know what I mean?
I don't know if I'd agree with that statement.
Yeah, it's just how
I know
it feels,
that's
right?
what's getting.
It's just how it feels.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was just about to say that. That's what's getting so much oxygen right now. You're absolutely right. Everywhere you turn, all you hear and see is, I'm a network guy learning programming, right? I'm a network gal learning programming. That's all you see and hear right now. I can tell you, at least from my point of view, and for the number of customers that I talk to in a day, week, month, and year, that it's still a vast number of folks that are becoming quote unquote programmers are in the minority. I mean, a very small minority.
So I can bring in Itential and solve my automation problems, and I don't do I need to know any Python? Do I need to?
Nope.
Oh my God.
You don't even have to know what Python is.
I don't even have to spell Python.
If you can work a mouse, you can automate with Itential.
Yeah, that's my kind of solution. I don't want to learn Python.
It's as simple that point, click, done. Oh gosh, I sound like a Windows commercial now.
Nice. Well, Peter, is there anything about Itential or yourself that we didn't ask you that we should have asked you?
Oh wow. Yeah, this is that point where of course, I've got all of our marketing people on my shoulder saying, "You can ask about this and this and this." No, it's all good. Now, I don't know if anything specific. I think that if anything, I would say that network automation right now, the way we think about it is still very much at its infancy. And I think we all have to recognize that, kind of taking back to what Andy's point just was, we hear so much about network automation everywhere we turn. You would think that it is mature, it's evolved, it is, we've got it all figured out. We don't. We're all flying by the seat of our pants. Some of us a little bit, some of us are a little more buckled in than others. And I would put Itential in that category. But I think the point being is that, we're going to evolve a lot in the next 3, 5, 7, 10 years. Mm-hmm. It's going to be, this is going to be a long road. I think it's safe to say that we've moved beyond that this is going to be a flashpoint kind of technology, right? Or a flashpoint, change. I think that this is a cultural change. I think it's a cultural change for the better. I think it's an exciting time to be a part of network automation. I think that there's a lot of good going out there, and I think that in order for that to continue, I think it's important that we all, kind of get involved in this thing in one way, shape, or form or another, whatever that is. I think it's just a really exciting time to be part of this industry. I think it's a great time to look at companies like Itential, look at what they're doing, try to read past the words and really dig into kind of what we've done here. And again, right, kind of getting to this idea of, what is it I'm trying to accomplish and look at what's out there and what it's capable of doing.
I love it. I absolutely love it. I want to say thank you to all of our Patreons for joining us tonight. If you're interested in joining our Patreon program, you can go to patreon.com/artofneteng and hang out with us while we record episodes. You can ask questions to the guest and just chat with us while we do our thing. Peter, where can people learn more about Itential?
Please come see Itential.com. I guess if I go old school, www.itential.com. They'll both get you there. There's plenty of marketing materials out there, white papers, technical reports, or technical papers, etc. You can also sign up for a cloud account at that point. Get started. You can get started for free. Create your account, get started working with Itential Automation Platform, start building workflows, automate your coffee pot. If you got an API-driven one, it's all good. And then also come visit us in the Twitter sphere, at Itential, tweet us. You can also tweet me directly at Private IP. I always love to hear from people. I try to be as engaging as I can be, so don't be shy.
I love it. Private IP. I don't think I'm following you, but I will be shortly. As we record this episode, you are a couple days away from participating in Network Field Day 27. So when this episode releases, it will be well after that. So we will make sure to put links to the Itential presentations for NFD in the show notes, so you can go watch those and see more Peter presenting. I'm sure it'll be a team of people from Itential, though, not just Peter. But you can learn a whole lot more about Itential from Networking Field Day. Are you ready for the big presentation?
Oh, I am. I have to admit, I get very excited. Whenever I'm presenting at conferences, if anyone's ever seen me present at a conference, I walk from one side of the stage to the other. How I've been able to sit in my chair this whole thing has been unbeknownst to me. That's very unusual for me. I love to present because I love the technology so much, and I love to interface with folks and just hear different perspectives and just kind of keep a beat on what's going on in the space. So.
I love the NFT
cool.
presentations. I watched Chris Wade's presentation back in February of Itential, and it was just a really 24 minutes succinct, takes you through the whole soup to nuts, and it was I really like those. Kind of distills it down to the what you need to know.
It does. Yeah, agreed.
All right. Peter Sprygada, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. It's been great, guys.
Thanks,
All
Peter.
right, and we'll see you next week on another episode of The Art of Network Engineering. Hey everyone, this is AJ. If you like what you heard today, then make sure you subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcatcher. Smash that bell icon to get notified of all of our future episodes. Also, follow us on Twitter and Instagram. We are at Art of NetEng. That's Art of NETENG. You can also find us on the web at artofnetworkengineering.com, where we post all of our show notes. You can read blog articles from the co-hosts and guests, and also a lot more news and info from the networking world. Thanks for listening.